So I'm not at my usual setup right now, and that's because I'm currently in Sweden visiting my friend in Gothenburg. And I've had so much fun already exploring the knitting culture here and comparing it to the more subtle one I'm used to in Ukraine. And it's just so fun to see people knitting everywhere here and actually wearing recognizable patterns in public. Of course, my biggest goal during the 2 weeks I'm here is to explore as many of the gorgeous yarn stores as possible in Gothenburg, as well as in Stockholm and Uppsala, where we're headed soon. And of course, I'm gonna take you with me. I'm going to try my best to include as many details as possible when it comes to the selection in the yarn stores I visit, as well as what to expect in terms of pricing, location, working hours. So everything that will hopefully help you plan your trip to Sweden or just window shop through me. So let's get started. But if you haven't subscribed, please consider subscribing so you don't miss my future videos. So over the course of my trip, I ended up visiting 8 different yarn stores in 3 cities, and I loved every single one. And even though it was quite an overwhelming experience because, as I said, I'm not used to that much variety in Ukraine, it was still unbelievably inspiring, and I'm so glad I had the chance to visit all of them. And I would also like to thank my friend Anya, who first of all invited me to Sweden in the first place and also helped me plan and film this video. So thank you so much, Anya. This video would not have been possible without you, and I love you. But anyway, our exploration starts with, first of all, my friend's favorite local yarn store called Broderi Garn. And just as the name suggests, because it translates to embroidery and yarn, it has a huge variety of both embroidery supplies and, of course, a lot of yarn. And their selection is just incredible. And in general, this is such a welcoming, warm place, which is located right in the city center. The yarn brands they carry in the store include, first of all, pretty much the whole range of Isager yarns, and this is the brand I saw the most in all of the different places I visited. They also have a lot of options from Rauma, including their patterns, which are quite, hard to find unless you buy a quantity along with the pattern on their official website. So this was really nice to see, and they specifically have Rauma Finull, which is the iconic, beautiful yarn for color work. I have never seen it in person before, but I've heard a lot of good things about it, and I was just overwhelmed with the wall of like 50 different colorways of this yarn, and it really inspired me to maybe find and like take on a new colorwork project to incorporate this yarn into. But I ended up not buying any Rauma Finull in this specific store because it was the first place we went to, and I wanted to kind of leave my options open. Another yarn from Rauma I saw in this store which really intrigued me was Lun Merino. It's a super interesting yarn because it's carded merino in exactly the same weight as like most DK weight cashmeres. It has the same feel as cashmere, but it's much more affordable. It would be a nice and, again, more budget-friendly substitution for any patterns that call for DK weight cashmere. So you can find pretty much any classic Scandinavian yarn brand at Broderi Garn, including Filcolana, Sadness Garn, Knitting for Olive, although the colorway selection is not as varied as in the second store I'm gonna talk about. Also, you can find Gepard Garn, specifically their summer yarns. Maybe it's just because I visited in the summer, but I didn't see a lot of their like woolly options. And speaking of Gepard Garn, I was really interested in their summer yarn called Wild&Soft, and I've heard so many good things about it, but I'm really glad that before I bought it at Broderi Garn, I made a swatch using my friend's leftovers of this yarn, and I have to say I don't really like it. It's too spirally, and the fabric it creates has this like almost novelty texture, which I don't think will be suitable for any of the projects I usually go for. But a new to me summer yarn which I really loved at that store was Vaya from Lane Yarns. It's a truly unique blend because it has merino, cotton, and yak. The store had a sample of T number 1 by My Favorite Things Knitwear knit in this yarn, and it was absolutely gorgeous. And lastly, Broderi Garn has a selection of local yarns. Some of them are more expensive than others, especially when it comes to hand-spun and hand-dyed stuff, but it's really worth it and can be bought as, a souvenir of the trip. In general, I would say that their yarns are quite reasonably priced, and I didn't notice as much of a markup as in some of the other stores I went to later in my trip, especially in Stockholm. Specifically, if we're talking about classic wools like Bergent or again Finull from Rauma or Peruvian from Filcolana, it would not be that expensive to get a sweater quantity at that store, and the vendors are actually super helpful and friendly, and it was a really pleasant experience chatting with them. I'm guessing this might be common knowledge, but I'd like to note anyway that pretty much everybody in Sweden speaks really good English, so you won't have any issues getting help or answers to your questions or recommendations in the yarn stores you visit. As I mentioned earlier, since this was the first yarn store I went to, I was kind of hesitant to commit to a sweater quantity or buy, just something I liked on the spot as I wanted with Wild&Soft, and I'm really glad I didn't, but I did get some yarn at that store. I bought 2 balls of Isager Trio 1. This is a popular thin summer yarn which kind of needs no introduction, but it's going to be my first time knitting with it, and it's called Trio because it has 3 different blend fibers in it, so it's lyocell, cotton, and linen. It's mostly used either combined with different yarns or in 2 or 3 strands held together, and I bought it specifically because I had a project and a really cool pairing in mind for it. So I was helping Anya organize her stash and raided her stash a little bit, and she had a leftover ball of this yarn which I paired with one of the mohairs or cashmere fluffy yarns I took with me, which was Cash Silk from Garner Nord, and I really liked the fabric it gave me. I immediately found a project for the gauge I ended up with, so now I'm knitting the obsidian blouse from Sophia Scottford. The second store we went to was actually just a 2-minute walk from Broderi Garn, and to get there you need to exit the store, turn left, go down the street and take another left, and then you'll immediately see a sign for a yarn store called 60 Garner Nord. And yes, I know it's probably not 60, but I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce any Swedish numbers here, so we're going with 60 Garner Nord. The atmosphere and selection here is quite different from Broderi Garn, and the store is smaller and feels more kind of fancy and curated. When I first entered the store, I was immediately impressed by this absolutely huge display of knitting for all of yarns in pretty much every colorway they have, and it takes up an entire wall and is neatly organized from darkest colors to lightest. It's just beautiful. So I'd have to say that if you're specifically looking for knitting for olive yarns, I would suggest going to this store instead of the previous one, just because the selection is much more varied. They also have a center island display, which is almost entirely dedicated to the Rerum Natura yarns, and this is a brand I was really interested in and haven't seen in a store before, so it was really fun to kind of get more familiar with it. There was also, quite unexpectedly for me, a huge variety of Mary Wallen British breeds, which are small 25-gram balls of wool which are designed specifically to be used in colorwork or fair isle projects. I really love this strong colorwork vibe, which you feel immediately when you get to this store, and they have some beautiful Fair Isle sweater samples and, of course, some yarns which are great for colorwork, such as Mary Wallen, Jameson and Smith, as well as some local wools, for example, from Hillesvåg. They also have some colorwork and Fair Isle kits you can buy, and I would suggest asking the salesperson to help you to make sure that you choose the right size and choose the right quantity, because it is quite a substantial purchase. Some other brands you can find at 60 Garner Nord include Ito yarns, which are always fun to see, and their Sensai mohair is one of the most luxurious mohairs I've ever seen, especially in terms of colorways. But I have to admit that I'm a bit intimidated by Ito because a lot of their yarns are quite thin and are intended to be paired with each other, sometimes with 3 or 4 strands held overall, and unless I have a very specific pattern in mind, I don't see myself buying them anytime in the near future, even though I'm super tempted. You can also find the full range of Isager here, including their new mulberry silk, which was not available at Broderi Garn at the time of my visit. They also have a wide selection of cute notions, so little pouches, scissors, markers, some Petit Knit branded products, and also a display of mood leather project bags. And right behind the notions counter, you will see the corner which has all of the delicious local yarns. So as I mentioned, Hillesvåg wool in different weights, as well as a very intriguing yarn called Kalinka. It's 100% linen with a beautiful, almost silky luster to it, and the richness and depth of color of some of the colorways, especially the jewel-toned ones, is unbelievable, but it is on a pricier side, so a 100-gram skein will set you back about $25. I visited this store pretty early in my trip, so I ended up not getting anything because I was still in my decision paralysis from seeing so many gorgeous yarns. But 60 Garner Nord is definitely worth a visit, and I have to say that out of the 3 yarn stores I've been to in Gothenburg, this one is the most high-end in terms of the yarns they carry. Here I also didn't notice as big of a markup, so the prices for Isager or Knitting for Olive are quite standard, but overall the yarns they choose to carry in the store are on the higher end side, so the prices start at around 100 crowns for one ball of yarn, not including the 25-gram Mary Wallen minis. So once we were done exploring our first 2 yarn stores, Anya also took me to a lovely buttons and notions store, just a 5-minute walk from 60 Garner Nord. And although I wouldn't go there for just sewing supplies or notions because they're quite overpriced, their button and ribbon collection is so gorgeous and so varied, and as far as I understand has some vintage stuff as well, so it's definitely worth popping by and just browsing through these beautiful books of buttons they have. And moving on to another neighborhood, the third yarn store we visited was called Stickwick, and we were lucky enough to visit on the Worldwide Knitting in Public Day, and it's been really fun to see people actually knitting in the square next to the store, and the owner was offering everybody who came in coffee and cookies. So the main attraction of the store, and something they really pride themselves in, is that they try to offer yarns that are not that easily available in other Swedish yarn stores, and they really deliver with their selection of Danish, Portuguese, British, and Icelandic wool. Firstly, they had a really large display of Holst Garn Supersoft, a classic fingering weight wool which is great for color work because it's toothy, it's grippy and matte, but not scratchy. And there's also a summer version of Supersoft called Cotton Merino, and it's, as the name suggests, made out of 50% cotton and 50% merino. Another Danish brand you can find at Stickwick is Couture, and I'm familiar with them because I know their patterns, and some of them are kind of in my mental queue, but I honestly forgot that they made yarn, but it's really impressive. For example, I really liked their linen silk and some also gorgeous vibrant colorways. They also have some pretty affordable DK weight wool, which was actually on sale at the time of me visiting. I, of course, became pretty biased towards Stickwick as soon as the owner offered us coffee and cookies, but I became even more biased and really excited when I saw that they have Retrosaria yarns. Retrosaria Rosa Pomar is one of my favorite yarn brands, and they're probably one of the most wholesome yarn brands out there, and Stickwick has all of their classics, so Mondim, Vovo, Bruska, Matisse. There are also a couple of yarns from Wool Dreamers at Stickwick, specifically their Mota wool and their gorgeous unspun. And Stickwick also has wool from their own brands, and it's similar to weight and feel of Cascade 220, which is what I used for this sweater, and it's a bit more expensive than the options from Retrosaria or Wool Dreamers or Kit Couture, but it might be worth picking up as a souvenir. The range of notions and needles is quite classic, so they have both Chaugu and C-knit, but they also have Vaya, which is a brand I don't see very often, and their main appeal is that they have really sharp tips on their metal needles and some really niche small needle sizes, for example 0.75 or like 1.25. And I ended up getting some Holst Garn Supersoft in the beautiful shade called Venetian and the matching lace weight alpaca for it. I originally picked it up as a contrast color for the Lupin sweater, but the quantity I have will be enough for a Maggie cardigan or a Maggie vest. So now I'm kind of trying to decide if I need a berry color Maggie cardigan in my life. A quite unexpected place where I was able to find yarn in Sweden was actually a chain bookstore called Adlibris, which to my surprise carries a pretty substantial variety of drops yarn as well as letlopi, and as far as I could understand, their own brand of yarn and even some blank undyed skeins for hand dyeing. All of it is pretty affordable, and I was thinking of maybe getting some drops bell for a quick summer project, but then decided against it because it would have been a mistake to waste my precious luggage space for a brand which I can easily find at home. And unfortunately, I was not able to explore Gothenburg as much as I wanted to because it was raining and really cold for the whole week I was there. So we mostly spent our time not exploring the yarn stores, sitting at home and knitting. And that means that I'm in no way qualified to give any city recommendations, but if I were to give just one, it would be their fish market called Fiskeshorka. I don't have that much footage of it, but it's a magical place which serves the best pickled herring I've ever tried, and it was so good that I still can't stop thinking about it, even though it's been like a month since I went to Gothenburg. And it also, I'm sorry to say, ruined Ukrainian pickled herring for me because our herring is a lot more salty and moist and it's covered in oil, but Swedish herring, on the other hand, is much more dry, sweet, and covered in lots and lots of sauce. Fiskeshorka is sort of a mix between a delicatessen and a restaurant, and it's located in a very beautiful, renovated 19th century fish market building. And of course, if you go to their restaurant with all of the fancy, delicious seafood, so smoked salmon, mussels, oysters, red caviar, black caviar, it's probably, gonna set you back, but their pickled herring, which you can get to go, is quite worth the price. It was around 100 crowns for a large serving, which was enough for the two of us, so I think it's pretty reasonable for how heavenly this herring was. And my favorite flavors, or like sauce flavors, were blackcurrant gin and also crab meat sauce. They were both just so delicious. So once our week in Gothenburg was over and the weather has treated us to one singular day of sunshine, we were off to Stockholm to continue our trip and continue exploring the yarn stores. And our list was quite substantial, but we started with a lovely store called Stockholm Knitting Company. The store is quite small and cozy and has these like curated minimalist vibes, but it's still packed with a lot of interesting yarn. And to my surprise, I found both Lamana and Pascuali in their selection, which are two German brands I have collaborated with, and I really love their yarns. As far as I understand, this is the only store in Stockholm where you can find these brands, and the owner herself is German. Some of the yarns I can recommend from these brands include Premia by Lamana, and it's my favorite mohair I've ever used. It's very soft, very lightweight, and super luxurious because of the high silk content. I've raved about it before because I used it for a project with two strands held together, and it holds up very well. I wear this t-shirt all the time and it still doesn't have like a single bubble on it. And Pascuali actually has a mohair substitution made out of cotton, which is called Suave, and it's very soft and non-itchy, so it can be great for those who are allergic to mohair or just don't like the feel of mohair against their skin. I'm also currently knitting a top from Pascuali's Pinta yarn, and it's one of their most popular fingering weight summer yarns. It's a mix of merino, silk, and ramie linen, so the composition is quite unique and I'm loving it so far. And besides these brands, Stockholm Knitting Company also carries Sadness Garn, Cardiff Cashmere, some beautiful hand-dyed sock yarn from John Arbon, and local wool from Ulcentrum. And of course, they also carry Retrosaria Rosa Pomar, including their adorable project bags, which are made out of scraps of fabric they sell in their Lisbon store and have the same artwork as on the ball bands. I'd say that most of the yarns you can find at Stockholm Knit Company, which I've just realized I've been calling Stockholm Knitting Company, so oops, but most of the yarns you can find here are going to be on the pricier side, but it's understandable because most of these brands are higher end, especially Lamana or Cardiff Cashmere, but for some of these yarns you don't really need as much. They go a long way, especially if you're talking about, for example, summer yarns like Pinta. You don't need a lot for a summer project. And what's interesting is that although the store is quite small, both times we visited it was never empty, so it never felt empty. It's a pretty popular spot with both locals and tourists, and the owner was super nice and helpful, and we had a fun time chatting about some patterns and yarns we both liked, and she also got really enthusiastic about this video when I asked her permission to film. In terms of location, Stockholm Knit Company is really close to its nearest subway station called Mariatorget. It's just a 5-minute walk away from it, and the neighborhood itself is also fun to explore with different thrift stores and cozy coffee shops and bakeries, as well as 2 other yarn stores we went to later on. And this neighborhood was also just a 20-minute walk away from the old town where we headed next, but on our way we popped into one of the thrift stores where I was mostly interested in ceramics and decor, but to my surprise, this particular store had a full section dedicated entirely to yarn, needles, sewing supplies, and fabrics. Of course, as it usually goes with thrift store yarns, a lot of it is either acrylic or a blend or some furry novelty yarn, but I was able to find 2 balls of Sadness Garn Line for less than half price, and I've also seen some woolly options. They had some Letlopi and Alphaslopi in that thrift store, as well as a beautiful selection of really cheap buttons and knitting needles. They also had a section of cone yarns, which I really didn't have time to look through, so maybe there was a hidden gem there that I just didn't have time to pick up. And once we got to the old town, our next destination was a cozy yarn store called Makeri 14, and again, I know it's not 14, but I don't speak Swedish, so I don't want to butcher the numbers. It's located in the middle of a very touristy area with all of the souvenir shops and cafes, restaurants, and beautiful facades, and it's a very small shop which is also surprisingly packed with beautiful yarns. Firstly, there is a larger display of local yarns here than at the Stockholm Knit Company, and they also have their own yarn brand, and the rest of the store is taken up by the Rerum Natura yarns, Majo Garn, Ito, and also a brand I rarely see in a brick-and-mortar store. It's Mayak. It's on the higher end side in terms of pricing, but they have very unique blends, mostly focused on camel, yak, Tibetan wool, and their yarns are some of the squishiest and most luxuriously soft out there. And Makeri 14 also has some beautiful finished objects in the store, and also gradient shawl kits for Ito Sensai, as well as a very special yarn hidden kind of behind the counter, and it's Fonte's Cordon Gora, which I think is going to have a big moment this fall. Overall, I genuinely very much like the selection of yarns they have at Makeri 14, and it kind of feels like a collection of favorites from the owner. It's very thought through, very curated, and I didn't leave empty-handed. I picked up 3 balls of Alice from the Rerum Natura for the ivy top, so the sleeveless version of the ivy pattern, and even though I love this yarn, I feel like I made a mistake selecting the brown colorway because I completely forgot that I have 2 more brown colored projects at home. I guess it's just one of those traps that you fall into when you buy yarn while traveling, because you just kind of forget what you have at home and you disassociate from your own stash, and everything feels new and interesting, but your mind just goes for something it likes anyway and something you probably already have. What makes it even worse is that usually something you buy when traveling is not something that is easily accessible at home, so now I'm stuck with 3 balls of Alice by the Rerum Natura, which is a beautiful yarn, but it's not in the colorway I would have liked. So after Makeri 14, we took a break in exploring the yarn stores and went outside the city for a midsummer celebration over the weekend. I was lucky enough to be invited to a celebration in a very small village in a really traditional summer home, and the island we went to was so remote that we had to take two different ferries, but it was so scenic and peaceful that it was absolutely worth the almost 3 hours it took us to get there. We then spent a whole day at Stockholm Skansen, which during midsummer works really long hours, so we had plenty of time to explore every single historical house and their zoo, their gardens. We even saw a sheep being sheared, which was very interesting, especially for me, who is a city girl, and believe it or not, I have never seen a sheep apart from at a petting zoo. And the entry fee to Skansen might seem high, but I'd say it's worth it because it's almost like a city within the city, and it will take you a full day to properly appreciate. And I would highly recommend taking either a packed lunch or even a picnic basket and a blanket with you, because their food court is quite overpriced for what it is, so you would be better off enjoying a picnic in one of their gorgeous gardens. And the next yarn store on our must-see list was the one I was honestly most looking forward to visiting, because I've heard it being praised by so many different people, and it's Anya's favorite yarn store in Sweden in general. Perhaps some of you might have already guessed which yarn store I'm talking about, and it's of course the Yllotyll in Uppsala, where we headed for a day trip, and thankfully this town is just a 1 hour train ride away from the Stockholm Central Station. Uppsala is not a small town by any means, but it's very compact and cozy, and of course it's worth the day trip even without the yarn store. But Yllotyll is really easy to find. It's just a 10-minute walk away from the train station, and it's located in the same area as all of the touristy Uppsala places. So we just exited the train station, went straight down, and at some point we just stumbled across it, so finding it was a no-brainer. So I was eager to see what all the fuss was about, and I was not disappointed. It's one of the largest stores out of the ones I've been to, and it was packed with knitters, so while it wasn't crowded, it still meant that it was harder for me to film because I didn't want to disturb people and I didn't want for anybody to be in the shot. But that aside, Yllotyll is a goldmine, and it carries firstly all the popular Scandinavian brands, so you probably know the list by now: Rauma, Knitting for Olive, Gepard Garn, Isager, Sadness Garn. They also carry Kamarose and Jelhot's Ulspinnery, which is the arch nemesis of every knitting podcaster because of how hard the name is to pronounce. And let me tell you, it took all the self-control I have in me to not splurge on a sweater quantity of their Håndverks garn, because it's exactly what I love. It's unapologetically rustic, toothy, scratchy, but extremely warm, and it's a mix of mohair and wool. Now I kind of understand why some people are not a fan of this yarn, because not everybody likes that kind of toothiness, but I am a fan of Lopi, for example, and this feels like a fancier version of Lopi. And one of the best things about Yllotyll is that they have a large windowsill full of discounted yarns. So at the time of my visit, they had line, tin line, pure silk, Japanese cotton from Isager for almost half the price. For such a large store, Yllotyll is almost pristinely organized, so it's really easy to browse through their yarns, plus the salespeople are also super friendly and helpful. And although the sheer amount of options there can be quite overwhelming, I came prepared with a very specific project in mind, and I'm happy to say that I got exactly what I was looking for. So there is a Japanese colorwork pattern book called A Clog with some mesmerizingly beautiful colorwork designs, and I was particularly interested in an all-over colorwork vest called Ophelia, which has a beautiful motif of flower buds knit in a gradient of colors. So it recommends Isager Highland wool as the suggested yarn, but I wanted to go for something slightly thicker because it only comes in one size, or more accurately, the pattern is a chart that only comes in one size. So I wanted to increase my gauge by using a thicker yarn, so I went for Rauma Finull for my flowers, and I picked up two different colors, a darker purple and a rose petal pink, but I also wanted to have a third color in my gradient, and I couldn't find anything I like from Rauma Finull in a lighter pink, so instead I went for Alpaca 2, which has a beautiful dusty light pink shade, and of course Alpaca 2 is slightly thinner than Rauma Finull, so I'm gonna have to hold a double and hopefully I won't have any issues with the texture. And for my main color, I went with Bio Shetland from BC Garn, and the biggest kind of showstopper of this future project is the green I chose, and it's Isager Tweed in the shade Moss. I'm just in love with this vibrant green shade, and it reminds me of freshly cut grass, and it's just so juicy, but I wasn't really a fan of Isager Tweed before. Both the Aran and fingering weight versions are tightly spun into kind of a rowing texture, and I don't like the fabric it creates usually, so I decided to try it out as one of the contrast colors since I don't need as much and this texture will not be noticeable. And I know that this vest will take me a long time to knit, plus I'll have to decipher the instructions in Japanese, but I'm really eager to start, and it's going to be my first ever project involving sticks. So I'm really pleased with my trip to Uppsala and especially my visit to Yllotyll, and I highly urge you to also take a day trip there, and you'll just need to get on the train number 40, for which you don't need to book a ticket in advance, and it leaves every half hour from the main train station. So once we were back in Stockholm, we had two more yarn stores on our itinerary, and both of them are located in the same neighborhood as the Stockholm Knit Company. So the first store we went to was Litet Nystan, and the name translates to little ball of yarn, but there is nothing little about this store. This is definitely the largest out of the ones we've been to. You'll recognize the entrance immediately because they have a beautiful large crochet pride flag and a storefront full of beautiful finished objects. So this store is very big, and it might not be as pristinely organized as Yllotyll and might be quite an overwhelming place if you don't have a plan when you go in. They have by far the widest brand selection here, which includes, of course, all the Scandinavian yarns, but also Lana Grossa, Rosarios, line yarns, Madeline Tosh, and even Cascade yarns. Litet Nystan has whole sections dedicated to sock yarn, cashmere, mercerized cotton, as well as hand-dyed merino, hand-dyed mohair. And there are also many different finished samples throughout the store. The nature of the display and shelves here means that it might be quite hard to reach some of the yarns without the assistance of a salesperson, and for example, their cashmere section actually has a sign asking to please not touch the yarn without assistance, and it's understandable because a lot of knitters pass through this store and it's always kind of not crowded, but again filled with knitters, and it's also a popular place with both locals and tourists. And Litet Nystan will be a great place to pick up your souvenir skein of hand-dyed merino or sock yarn, and they also have a cute section with buttons. They mostly had pearl buttons in various colors, and now that I'm rewatching the footage I took, I really regret not picking up a set. So this was the only store where I did notice a markup on popular brands like Knitting for Olive, Sadness Garn, Isager, and of course, understandably, their hand-dyed yarns are also quite expensive, but on the other hand, they do have enough variety for you to be able to choose something more affordable if you need to, for example, from brands like Rosarios. And I've also found out that Litet Nystan regularly participates in fundraisers supporting Ukraine, so this was a nice surprise. And after Litet Nystan, it was time for us to go to our final yarn store, and it was a small and cozy welcoming shop called Fingerborg. Out of the all yarn stores I talked about, this is the only one that primarily carries their own brand, besides a couple of wool options from Hillesvåg. So they have classic hand-dyed sock yarn and merino, as well as a very beautiful squishy non-superwash wool. They also have unspun wool and some very unique hand-dyed silk mohairs, ranging from a more standard silk strand with mohair to the ones that have either a metallic strand or sequins. The prices at Fingerborg are what you would expect for a small batch hand-dyed yarn, but they also use some very luxurious compositions, which in my opinion justifies the price even more. The yarn I loved here the most is called Symfoni, and it comes in both fingering and DK weights. It's another hand-dyed yarn, and the base here is baby alpaca, linen, and silk. This combo was unlike anything I've seen before, and believe me, by that point I've seen a lot of different yarns and unique compositions, and the silk gives it a beautiful luster, while the baby alpaca gives it its drape, and it's all finished with this like playful halo of linen fibers. Fingerborg also has a whole section dedicated to hand-dyed felting wool, and they also offer sets of sock yarn mini skeins, and they come up with limited edition colorways every month. The owner of the store was very sweet, and it was super lovely to chat with her, and I kind of regret not coming to Fingerborg sooner in my trip, because at that point I was out of cash after all of the yarn stores and thrift stores I've been to, and I kind of fulfilled all of my yarn needs and didn't have any space in my luggage. But believe me that next time I go to Stockholm, I'll definitely set aside a separate Fingerborg fund and will treat myself to some of their unique yarns. It's gonna be impossible for me to choose a favorite among all of the yarn stores I visited, and I recommend you go to each one in this list. I haven't had a single bad experience, and I came back home with so much inspiration, so many new ideas, new knowledge about different yarns and new patterns I'd like to add to my list. So it was worth it, and in general I had an amazing time in Sweden, and I know it might sound corny, but I'll cherish the memories of this trip for a very long time. And I'm also glad that I was able to sort of bring you along with me on this trip and show you some of the beautiful places I've been to, and again, hopefully help you plan your possible or future or upcoming trip to Sweden, because the amount of different yarn stores and different places that are worth visiting is quite overwhelming, and I hope this was somewhat helpful. I've also never done a video like this before, and I'm not really good at vlogs and like location footage, so I hope I did an okay job. If you like this video, please give it a like and consider subscribing for more. And if you'd like to support my channel directly and buy me a cup of coffee, I have my PayPal linked in the description. I hope you're having a wonderful summer, and I wish you a lovely day and happy knitting, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!